The family court is where parents' rights and children's future are decided. Today we're meeting with two family practitioners, Andrea Panjuani and Catherine Tracy, who will be joining us later on. They both help women at the Bronx Family Court. So Andrea, thank you for coming. Jane, thank you for joining us for this program. Jane is Andrea's client and they have accepted today to talk to us about family issues. So Andrea, you practice law in New York. What does it mean to be a family law practitioner?
You know, I practice various forms of law, and I find family law the most difficult in many ways. I think there needs to be a lot of reform in the family system. It's not necessarily geared to handle the complex nature of the relationships, and often further entrenches the parties. And cases often go on for an extremely long period of time. You know, it's not uncommon to have a case pending for 2 or 3 years in the family court, and it just heaps tremendous amount of stress on the families involved.
Yeah, that's right. Jane is here with us, and vous avez un cas à la Cour des familles?
Oui.
Jane only speaks French, so I'm going to translate. Jane right now has a family court case. For how long has this case been going on?
Jane is actually one of my luckier clients.
Good.
In that we recently wrapped up her case, although her matrimonial case now will be pending for some time. But with the majority of my clients, I would say 2 to 3 years is the average amount, unless we have the good fortune of being able to resolve it. And most of my cases involve domestic violence, so they're not eligible for a mediation track.
What led you to family practice?
Well, my desire was to serve people who are marginalized, and I work for an African human rights organization. So our practice is actually very much client-driven, and most of our clients come to us seeking assistance with immigration law, family law, and housing law. And that's actually, I kind of found my way there through my clients.
And how this happened? Because in life we all have a mission, and you have found your mission. You are happily matched with a mission that is, you know, basically making you a happy practitioner. So what were your first step in the profession?
You know, after graduating, my first job out of law school was as a legal services lawyer. I worked for Legal Services of Greater Miami.
Oh, great. So you're coming from Florida?
Well, I went to law school in New York, but I took my first job down in Miami. I was recruited by someone at the New York Law School's Public Interest Symposium. So I started off doing housing law, civil rights law, and eventually family law down there. Also serving the immigrant community.
Can you talk about the nonprofit organization that you're working for a viewer? Because basically in New York we have a lot of resources, and sometimes not everybody knows about it.
Yeah, my particular organization is called the African Services Committee. It's a nonprofit located in Harlem, and the mission is to serve, you know, immigrants from the African diaspora. And we have a very comprehensive model. So there's public health services at my office, there's social work services, there's legal services available, as well as things like food pantry and English classes.
Wow, that's awesome. Jane, where do you come from? D'où venez-vous?
Je viens de la Côte d'Ivoire.
Okay, Ivory Coast is the country where Jane is coming from. Who wants to start first? Do you want to explain what happened to Jane, or maybe she can tell us about her experience? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe Jane could, she may want to start by telling her what prompted her to come to our office.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to fill in.
I'm gonna say it in French. Donc, qu'est-ce qui vous est arrivé? Qu'est-ce qui a décidé que vous alliez donc au bureau d'Andrea?
Ce qui m'est arrivé, c'est j'étais vraiment déçue d'un problème dans mon foyer.
I was very disappointed with a problem in my family.
C'est comme je suis là depuis 1991, je suis à New York, mais j'ai toujours des problèmes avec mon mari. On a toujours fait des problèmes dans mon foyer. Mon mari cherche toujours deuxième femme. Il me fait le mal.
Okay, so what Jane is explaining is that she's encountered a lot of c'était des problèmes de violence domestique.
De violence.
She has encountered a lot of domestic violence problems, and basically she had to go to court. Qu'est-ce que vous alliez chercher à la cour? What were you seeking in court?
Je suis partie prendre le protection order à la cour pour me protéger.
Okay, so what's available in New York is an order of protection. Maybe Andrea, you can explain what it is, because a lot of people don't know that this resource is available.
Yes, an order of protection is also known as a stay-away order.
Okay.
And it's a court order that's issued through the family courts in domestic violence situations. So to be eligible to get one, you have to be living in some sort of family relationship, and it could be a non-traditional family relationship. And if you are living in a violent situation or a threatening situation and you don't feel safe, you can apply to the family court for an order of protection. And you go down to the clerk's office, and the initial step is to fill out a petition. And if you don't have a lawyer at that stage, there is a clerk that will help you fill out the petition.
So you don't automatically need a lawyer to go and get that order?
You don't at all. And once you fill out the petition, the clerk brings it to the judge who's on duty. And the judge will normally, if there's a basic showing of fear and some sort of harm, the judge will usually sign something called a temporary order of protection, and then you're given a notice to return to court for a hearing, and the other party will be served.
Okay.
And while the order of protection is in effect, if the person who's causing the harm comes near the person, calls the person, stalks the person, threatens the person in any way, even through a third party, the victim can call the police, and that's actually a criminal violation, and the wrongdoer can be arrested.
So you can both have a case in criminal court as well as in family court?
Yes, that's actually very possible.
Andrea, how long have you been practicing law?
It's been close to 18 years now.
Wow, and what were your ideals and thoughts when you started? What motivated you?
I was very motivated to represent people who are marginalized, and to try to be part of leveling the playing field a little bit.
Why is that?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I think in my life I realize all the blessings I have, are by grace. There's nothing I've done to deserve, the blessings that I've had in my life. And so many people have had a much more difficult start. And I just wanted to be part of a process that, that helps to give people who are in the margins a voice and work a little bit toward justice.
So I can tell that your reward is about helping and contributing. What are the things that reward you the least?
That reward me the least? Because the legal system is adversarial, there's often a lot of hostility, in the course of practicing law. And, I think the ideal in any kind of case, whether it's a housing case or a family case, is helping the parties step toward, an improved relationship in some way, whether it's with your landlord or your spouse or the father of your child. And a lot of times, I think the court process, entrenches the parties even deeper.
So basically, you're saying that by going to court, we don't automatically solve problems, we make it bigger?
There are times when that's true. And I think in family law, we see that quite often, because people become quite defensive, when you're in an adversarial setting. And I think particularly in family court, we might want to look at alternatives, before putting people across the table from each other in a trial mode.
Are you talking about mediation?
It could be mediation. There's a whole movement called collaborative law, where parties meet with lawyers who are trained in, who are obviously trained lawyers, but also have mediation and counseling skills, and help the parties, understand, why there's been a breakdown, and help, one party understand the situation from the point of view of the other party, and help, redirect the focus to the children. And they can be very effective, and it's not in court, so it's a lot less expensive, people are a lot less defensive. This is not always appropriate when there's been a situation of extreme domestic violence, because one party generally has a lot more power and control over the other. But in a situation where both parties are represented, I think that's a start.
Okay. Let's go back to the order of protection, because it's the first step for women to get a protection, or for whoever needs the protection. How do you use an order of protection? Because oftentimes people are given an order of protection, but they don't know really how to use it.
That's true. Well, for example, if most often it's a woman who has one, and if the woman has children, it's recommended that a copy of the order of protection be brought to the children's school. If a woman is employed, it's recommended that a copy be brought to the place of employment, so they know not to give access to the partner against whom the order has been issued. The woman should probably carry it with her at all times, and be advised to dial 911 if it's being violated. And the violation could be as simple as a phone call or a text message or an email, or as serious as stalking and threatening.
Talking about domestic violence, oftentimes the only solution is to send women to a women's shelter. So I've heard it's much better than the usual shelter. Can you talk about it?
Yes, that is my understanding, because they're set up to house women with children. So it's more of an apartment setting in many cases. And our city runs a couple of good ones, including Sanctuary for Families and Safe Horizon. Because I think in the typical shelter system, it's either dormitory style or you're in a single room occupancy hotel situation. And in those settings, there's often a lot of drug dealing, and it's not uncommon to see fighting. So the women's shelter, I think it's much more protected, and also the address is confidential. So she feels much safer for that reason as well.
What would you recommend to women coming from Africa and trapped in a domestic violence situation?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hurdles to overcome, because you have a cultural context. A lot of women feel shame to step forward and disclose this. They don't grow up in a culture of individual rights the way we do. And it can be considered shameful to the family at home to disclose something like this and to take action against a partner. So I think, you have to meet the person where they are and understand that. And often there's a long counseling process that's involved. And again, once children come, that's often the trigger when the woman maybe didn't want to bring shame on her family. For herself, on her own account, she'll be willing to risk an alienation of that relationship once children come and violence has escalated.
Do you find that there is a cultural gap that basically takes place when you have a family coming from Africa and children born in the United States?
There often is, because the children born here are, culturally American for most part, even though they have the influence. They don't have the home language. They're being raised, in the American culture, going to American schools, and their worldview is going to be a little bit different than that of their parents. So I think that also adds to the fear of the mother. If she's deported, she's in a situation where she has to leave her American-born children here, or bring them back to Africa, but it may not, it's not their country in the same way that it's her country.
It's a tremendous power given to the men that are basically bringing the woman from their land country here, to give them the power to have a woman here that is basically at their order.
Yes, it's interesting. We've seen two scenarios where there's domestic violence. We've seen situations where American men go to Africa and marry African women, bring them here, and effectively treat them as slaves. The women are expected to cook, to shop, to provide sex on demand, but are precluded from working and learning English and having friendships and forming their own networks here. So that's a scenario we see, and yes, that's a tremendous amount of power, because you have a woman with no support system and who doesn't have the language and doesn't know there's protections available, and that's a tremendous amount of power. And then we also have the other situations where an African-born man will bring over his African wife, but maybe also have relationships here. And again, the woman will feel dependent. I mean, Jane may tell you she was in a shelter for some time, and after several months, the shelter told her, you need to find somewhere to go. Is there anyone you can call? And the only person she had to call was the abuser. She had no support system because she had been so isolated.
Jane, I understand you lived in a shelter. Can you share your experience with us? J'ai compris que vous avez vécu dans un abri. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire comment ça s'est passé pour vous? Parlez un petit peu fort dans le micro.
J'étais dans le shelter depuis 1993.
I was in a shelter since 1993.
Mon mari m'avait frappé en 93 et on m'a pris, mon enfant et moi, on habitait dans un shelter pour 7 mois.
I was a victim of domestic violence and my husband was beating me.
Dans le shelter, j'ai habité pendant 7 mois. Après, le shelter me dit d'appeler si vous connaissez des parents.
I lived in a shelter for 7 months, and then the shelter told me if I could call someone, a parent or someone I would know.
Maintenant, j'ai rappelé encore mon propre mari qui m'avait frappé.
I had to call my husband, who was my abuser.
Parce que je ne savais pas, comme j'étais nouvelle dans ce pays, je ne savais pas comment ça se passe.
Because I was new in this country, I didn't know how things were working.
Donc, je suis obligée de rappeler la même personne qui m'avait frappé.
I had to call the same person who was my abuser.
Donc, après, je suis quittée dans le shelter, je suis repartie encore chez la même personne.
I had to basically go back to the same person, my husband.
Parce que en Afrique, on ne connaît pas les histoires de shelter.
Because in Africa, shelter does not exist, the concept of shelter.
Mon mari m'a fait venir, il m'a frappé, je ne suis pas obligée d'aller habiter dans le shelter.
Because my husband hit me, I was not obliged to go to a shelter.
Donc quand je suis arrivée encore à la maison, c'est les mêmes choses qui continuent.
So when I came back home, everything came back the same.
C'est comme je suis allée dans le shelter, comme je n'ai pas obéi la loi de l'Afrique.
Because I didn't obey the African law. Qu'est-ce que c'est la loi d'Afrique?
La loi d'Afrique, c'est comme tu ne peux pas envoyer ton mari, tu ne peux pas dire aux policiers que mon mari m'a frappé.
In Africa, the law is that you cannot tell that your husband has been beating you up.
Donc c'est comme j'ai désobéi ce qu'on fait, la loi de l'Afrique.
Because I disobeyed the law from Africa. Vous parlez d'une loi qui est écrite ou est-ce que c'est un code entre les gens? Est-ce que c'est une loi qui fait partie... Je ne peux pas croire qu'en Afrique, est-ce que les femmes n'ont vraiment pas de droit?
En Afrique, si ton mari te fait quelque chose, c'est entre vous les familles, vous réglez. Pas.
In Africa, when your husband is, basically putting you in a domestic violence situation, the family has to settle the situation.
C'est pas la police.
It's not the police.
Donc quand tu viens dans ce pays que tu appliques la loi de police, c'est comme tu n'es pas une bonne femme africaine.
So when you come to this country and you apply the police law and the American law, you are not a good woman.
Donc c'est la situation que j'ai vécue pendant vraiment des années.
I have lived through this situation for many years. Qu'est-ce qui vous a le plus aidé pour sortir de ce cycle de violence? What helped you the most to exit this cycle of violence?
Donc pour le moment, je suis vraiment fatiguée de vivre ça. J'ai appelé maintenant la police finalement qui m'a dit d'aller à court de prendre protection.
Finally, I was really tired of this situation and the police basically advised me to go to court and take an order of protection.
Donc aujourd'hui, je suis plus dans l'affaire de frapper.
Where do you live now? Où est-ce que vous vivez maintenant?
Je vis maintenant dans le Bronx avec mes enfants.
Qui vous a aidé pour trouver un appartement?
C'est mon lawyer.
Qui?
Mon lawyer Andrea.
Andrea. Oh, c'est votre avocat. This is my lawyer who helped me.
Avec.
Allez-y. C'est mon avocat qui m'a aidé.
C'est mon avocat qui m'a aidé à mes social workers, qui m'a aidé pour me loger à mes enfants.
There are some clients that will eventually just give up because they just can't take the stress of returning to court time after time and seemingly getting nowhere. Or maybe we get the custody order and then 2 months later the father files a new custody petition and we're right back where we started and begin the process again. So it can be a very long journey, and there are abusers who use the system to continue the process of controlling the woman. So I'd say, you know, maybe 75% of the time we have success stories where there's good outcomes and it's been a re-traumatizing experience, but there's supports around her and she steps forward in her life. But there is that 25% of the case time where I think women are re-traumatized to the point where they give up or where the abuser just continues to misuse the system to control her.
You know, you see the statistics all the time that, you know, I think the common one that I hear quoted is that there are 7 attempts to get away from a domestic violence situation before someone does it finally and completely. And I think the courts and people who work there are very aware of that. So every time there's a domestic violence case, you know, no one really knows if that's going to be the opportunity for the person to break free of the domestic violence situation, or if it's going to be, you know, a lot of time and effort and not end well for the person who is trying to get out of the situation. And I think that people are sensitive to that and just treat every situation as though this could be the time that this person can get out, and what can I do other than just, you know, representing someone in court to maybe facilitate it really happening.
Another thing, this is, hopefully you can edit this, that I wanted to point out. A lot of our judges, you know, are intelligent and well-trained, but not necessarily, you know, don't necessarily have a cross-cultural background, and can often misread the nonverbal language of our clients, and often don't understand that many of our clients come from countries with worldviews that are not linear like ours are. And I think anyone, regardless of what culture you're from, when you've been traumatized, it impacts your ability to have a chronological recall. That's another, I think, something we need to work on, you know, systemically. I mean, just to give a couple examples of that, there are clients I have from African countries who smile regardless of how much pain they're in. It's actually, it's cultural. They will smile. And, you know, as I'm preparing a client for court, I try to be the cross-cultural translator to let them know how that might be perceived by a judge in our system. But there are times when we have a client who will smile or maybe not remember something in a chronological or linear way, but be able to express what happened, you know, with a visceral memory, with a visceral recall. And the judge will hold that against the person.
There are also women I've represented who are not literate in any language, and they've come here and they haven't worked, usually because the husband or the man they were with didn't want them to work. It was part of the social isolation. So they don't have a means of earning money. They don't have an easy way to get benefits that they might be entitled to, and the realization comes to them that the work is really just starting.
Je suis africaine du Cameroun. Et je suis arrivée ici aux États-Unis depuis mai 2008.
I'm from Cameroon and I came here in 2008.
Et je suis également avec mes 3 enfants ici en Amérique.
I am also with my 3 children.
Oui, depuis que je suis arrivée, j'ai connu une violence aussi terrifiante que je me trouve dans l'obligation aujourd'hui de m'exprimer.
Since I've been here, I've been exposed to such a violence that I have to express myself.
Alors, mon époux m'a traité d'une esclave.
My husband was treating me as a slave.
C'est lui qui choisissait les repas.
He was choosing what we would eat.
C'est lui qui décidait de tout à la maison.
He was deciding of everything and about everything at home.
Très souvent, il ne me laissait même pas, il ne voulait même pas que je me repose.
Oftentimes, he wouldn't let me rest.
Lorsqu'il me trouve couché, il me demande de me lever et aller dans la cuisine.
When he find me home, he asked me to wake up and go to the kitchen.
Nous avions interdiction de rester au salon, visionner la télévision, mes enfants et moi, avec lui.
We had the formal interdiction. It was forbidding us to watching TV.
Ce qui fait que mes enfants, eux aussi également, étaient terrorisés comme moi.
My children and I are terrified.
On n'avait pas la possibilité de s'exprimer.
We didn't have any way to express ourselves.
Et les menaces étaient de multiples dimensions.
The threats were various and really big.
Il nous menaçait.
He was threatening us.
Il nous rappelait même qu'il va nous faire retourner en Afrique.
He was also reminding us that we could be deported to Africa
Si on ne respectait pas tout ce qu'il voulait qu'on fasse.
if we were not respecting everything he wanted us to do.
Il nous privait
He was really depriving us.
de toute sortie. On ne pouvait pas sortir.
We couldn't even go outside.
On ne connaît aucun endroit ici depuis que nous sommes arrivés aux États-Unis.
We are very isolated since we came here. We don't know anything in the US.
La situation est tellement difficile que
The situation is so difficult that
nous vivons, mes 3 enfants et moi, avec une pension alimentaire hebdomadaire par semaine de $120.
we live with $120 per week.
Et c'est avec ces $120 que je fais tout.
And
Vraiment, ma situation est dégradante parce que là, je me retrouve en train de rétrograder.
that's a very degrading situation. I'm finding myself in a very regressing situation.